You haven't got anything?
Okay, we're all live now, so I'll hand over to the chair.
Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to Policy and Strategy Committee meeting for the first time online. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll just first of all deal with apologies for absence, minutes, and declarations of interest, and then I'll do a brief. Thought I'd do just a brief chair's announcement, because obviously we've taken the decision that we won't now be having an AGM in accordance with government changes in guidance and regulations, which all members have been notified about until next year. And just wanted to update on some of the excellent work that John and all colleagues right across the fire service have been doing, obviously in responding to the awful situation with COVID-19. So we'll just deal with apologies for absence, minutes, declarations of interest, and then I thought I'd do chair's announcements, and then we'll move into the formal sections of the agenda if people are okay with that. So item 1 is apologies for absence. Any apologies for absence? I know that the Councillor Clark is currently trying to dial into the meeting, but was having some technical issues, so hopefully will join us at some point throughout the meeting. And I don't think there are any other apologies for absence. No. Okay. Item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of January. Anybody who wants to raise any questions or comments in relation to the minutes? No members happy to approve the minutes of the meeting on 31st of January?
Agreed.
Seeing nods, yeah, and thumbs up, brilliant. Declarations of interest, any declarations of interest from elected members that they want to raise? No? Okay. So I'll just give a brief update in terms of chair's announcements. Obviously, just want to set out that there are interim arrangements now in place for this and other meetings of the authority. Thanks to group leaders, to Toby and to Andy on behalf of the elected members on the authority, agreeing cross-party that it was sensible, given the situation and the emergency response that the fire service is playing in terms of COVID-19, that we would, in line with government guidance and regulations, delay our AGM until the scheduled AGM next year. And I know a note, thank you to Clark, Malcolm Camro, has gone out to all elected members to that effect. And as I say, thank you to Toby and to Andy for agreeing that in a cross-party fashion. We also agreed on behalf of members on the authority that it was sensible to trial policy and strategy committee, if you like, as the committee that deals with the major policy and strategy items for fire authority, as the first virtual meeting to see whether we could make that work. And indeed, our group leaders meeting was held over Zoom with the chief fire officer and a number of other senior officers, and myself and Toby and Andy, and worked very well. So if we can get policy and strategy committee up and running and it works well today, then we can look to start bringing other committees online. But we thought the best thing in the initial instance, not to put too much pressure on the service when it's responding to the emergency response, was to trial this committee first and run, if you like, all major decisions through this committee, which has a broad representation, not only of the city and council, but obviously also of the political groups that are represented on the authority. Just also wanted to thank all of our staff, John and his entire team, everybody, right from colleagues on the front line to colleagues in support and back office roles in the service, for what they're doing, stepping up in support of our communities. I think we've all seen, I know I've had messages back and John's had messages back from all members of the authority where, as we always see from the fire service, stepping up and playing their role in supporting, whether that be assisting in terms of the incredibly, sad area of work with the police in terms of the increased mortuary capacity that has been needed, or whether it be supporting and assisting food banks, deliveries of medication, or indeed supporting and assisting our colleagues in East Midlands Ambulance Service with moving round of patients, etc., to the hospitals. It's been incredibly welcome. John, I don't know whether you want to add a little bit more detail to the work that's been done, but just to say on behalf of the entire authority, and I know this was echoed by Andy and Toby and group leaders, that the authority is incredibly grateful for the excellent work that our staff are doing. And we are fully aware that obviously in difficult and challenging times where we're only 100 and something days into the new virus without a vaccine, we're acutely aware that some of our staff are pushing themselves at risk in order to protect communities in the way that they do day in, day out. So please, can you convey our thanks on behalf of authority to the entire staff? And I don't know whether you just wanted to add a bit more detail to the excellent work that's been done.
Actually, I'll probably leave it to the agenda item where I've got a full update for members on that, and certainly an element of that is recognition of where staff have really stepped up and supported communities in the face of those risks that you've mentioned. So I'll cover it more fully then, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And also thanks to I know Craig and others, but also at national level have been working with our colleagues from the trade unions as well in the service. Thanks to our colleagues from the trade unions as well for the work they've done alongside staff in relation to that as well. And I'm sure we'll touch on that further as in the agenda item. Just also a recognition, I think, that everybody's had to adapt their working practices, working from home differently and putting in the extra effort. And particular thanks to the unseen heroes behind the scenes, Gavin Harris and all of this team in relation to IT, not only for supporting service in doing that different work pattern from home, but obviously supporting us as elected members who've been able to come together in this fashion and conduct our business as well. So a huge thank you to all the support staff behind the scenes who often aren't seen and don't get the credit that they deserve for allowing us to all continue to function as a service and as an authority as well. Just a particular tribute, I don't want to embarrass him, to and we'll talk about this in terms of finance later in the agenda, to John. I think John's role at a national level in terms of National Fire Chiefs Council and the lead role that he's playing in terms of the finance for the National Fire Chiefs Council is really proving and paying dividends for the authority and indeed actually for the entire sector. John's huge amount of experience and and I think excellent skills at building relationships with colleagues across the sector, both professional colleagues but also elected members. And I think Toby and Andy and I saw that at the fire conference earlier in the year has really paid dividends. The relationships John's built in the Home Office, and I think we saw that in Tranche 2 funding, a significant uplift for fire services and a significant uplift for Nottinghamshire, obviously as well, in line with the proportionate uplift for the rest of the sector. So a massive thank you to you, John, for the work that you're doing at a national level, and I'm sure that will continue to pay dividend for the authority. I've also tried through my national roles in the local government association to support and assist John's work, and indeed through conversations on the NJC, which I think anybody on the NJC, including union colleagues, sometimes that can be frustrating. In terms of the process that has to be gone through, but clearly there is a process for very good reason. But everybody's been trying to pull together in that way. And then finally, just from me as a chair, I thought I just really wanted to say thank you particularly to you, Andy, but to all colleagues on the Fire Authority for the cross-party way that we've not only worked over the last year, but specifically in the last few weeks. The support, certainly in a cross-party fashion, to bring working arrangements together is massively welcome from my perspective as chair, and I know he's welcomed by the chief, and I think it gives real confidence to the service that the authority is squarely behind what we're doing. And I certainly appreciate it, Andy, so thank you very much for the way that you've engaged, contributed, added real value, I think, to those group leaders meetings and the collaboration meetings. I know we've got another one next week, Andy. It's very appreciated by me, and I know John's told you that previously. It's very appreciated by him as well, and I hope that you feel valued in your role as leader of the opposition. And thank you as well, Jonathan, to the way that you've engaged, particularly with some of the work that we know you've been doing outside of the normal governance arrangements for the Fire Authority in relation to other areas. You've done a huge amount of work there. I think you know what I'm referring to there, and that's incredibly welcome. So that's everything from me in terms of chair's announcements. Anybody got any comments or questions they want to raise on that? Okay, if we go back to the substantive agenda and item 4, financial impact of the COVID-19 outbreak. John, shall I bring you in first?
Yeah, there is a substantive change to this, which Becky will cover because of the Tranche 2 funding. So that change is one of the recommendations. I'll let Becky talk you through that. But in essence, that funding will effectively create the reserve we were going to request to use our own reserves. But other than that, I'll let Becky sort of talk you through the detail, the way we've been responding, and the potential impacts, the real impacts we're feeling now financially, but the potential impacts going forward as well, particularly on things like income generation or income streams, really, not generation, but how that may affect the longer term as well. But I'll hand over to Becky, Chair, please.
Just 2 seconds, Becky, before you do. Just welcome to Councillor Clark, who's I think joining us now online on the phone. Hopefully, John, you can hear me. You picking me up, John?
Yeah, picking you up. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Becky.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's been a very fast moving environment, as you'll appreciate, and things have changed substantially in the financial world since we even just set the budget back at the end of February. And a lot of the strategic financial papers were only agreed in December and in February, and already they're looking quite out of date. So end of March, we had quite a significant pressure on the cash flow. There was talk about possibly even moving the free council tax months from February and March next year to April and May this year to try and relieve the pressure on households that were struggling financially. So if that had happened, we'd have had a £3 million per month shortfall in our income. So that led us to try and shore up our cash flow if that were to happen. And we did pull back a lot of the investments that we got invested over 1 month and 3 months to pull that back. PWLB rates dropped as well, so we took advantage of that and undertook some borrowing that we were still due to take out for last year's capital programme, as 2018-19 capital programme. That we hadn't taken because the PWLB rates had gone up. So we took advantage of that and we've borrowed money there. So we're now no longer in an under borrowed position. In addition to that, the report has asked for a temporary increase in the borrowing limits just to allow any short-term borrowing should it be required in the coming months. It will definitely just be shoring up the cash flow. It's not about long-term borrowing, which is to finance the capital programme. As you know, that remains unchanged. I think now things have calmed down a little bit. There's less likelihood that we'd need it. It was just to provide us some flexibility, especially in times where we weren't holding the finance and resources meetings. It just gives us a bit of scope to work within. And obviously any borrowing that would be undertaken up around those areas would be done in consultation with the Treasurer and the Chair of the Finance and Resources Committee. So that was the first part of the report. It went on to talk about some of the other pressures that there could be on some of the prudential limits. I think we're looking to work within those. It was just to raise awareness, really. Anything that is exceeded or any limits that we're getting close to will again be done in consultation with the Treasurer. So moving on to the revenue and capital budgets, as John has already mentioned, we did receive £191,000 grants right at the beginning of the financial year to help cover the costs of the additional costs of COVID-19. We've now received an additional 867,000. We've not actually received it yet, but we've got notice that we will be receiving 867,000, which takes our total to just over £1 million. At the moment, we don't feel that it's necessary to move any further funding into a reserve to cover the costs, because we're looking here at additional costs, not just the full cost of if we're moving resources around to use them in a better way, using staff that can't do their normal work into a more frontline service. Those costs we'll already be paying for anyway. So this is to cover additional costs. So as John's mentioned, we're not requesting that extra 309,000 now, and we'll just use the funding that we've got, and we'll monitor it as the year goes on just to see where we are. I can't see us requiring any more, certainly at the early stages of the year. With regards to the monitoring of the budget, we're anticipating that there will be some areas where we're spending less at the moment, for example in training, where we haven't been able to put on courses, for example, and when we're not able to go out and visit on safe and well visits. So there are some areas that we know are going to be reduced activity and reduced expenditure. Hopefully later in the year we can probably pick some of those activities back up, and we're already looking at doing more online training. Some of that involves doing stuff in a different way, might involve additional costs in setting up online training courses, for example, but we'll monitor that as we go on, because obviously we want to maintain ourselves in the best possible position going forward when we come out of lockdown, and you know, we will still need to be delivering our training so that we can keep a full complement of staff. One big area that I think will impact on the budget is the council tax collection and business rates collection. I'm working very closely with the local authorities and with the other finance leads from the local authorities within the county. I'm expecting that we got in the budget the surplus on the collection fund, which assumes that collection rates will be slightly higher than we set ourselves as a minimum rate. I think that's going to be under quite significant pressure now. So we have a budget of 94,000 that I think will not materialise now. There'll be further impact. All the councils have set up hardship funds for council taxpayers, and they're paying out significant sums of that as we speak at the moment. This week, money's starting to flow out for that. Same with the rates, with business rates. A lot of organisations are receiving loans from the district councils, and as a result, and grants as well. And as a result of that, we're hopefully helping support the economy. But I do expect that there will be an impact on the business rate income going forward. I think it's going to be a while before we know the full impact of that. So we'll be undertaking monitoring this year in a normal way. Extra scrutiny will be given through SLT and reporting back through, we would normally report through Finance and Resources Committee. So we'll be circulating reports as normal around the committee members on monitoring until we're getting a position to hold those meetings again. And anything that requires any decision making, where we were intending to bring back to the Policy and Resources Committee in July. That was intending to go ahead. So on the monitoring, the capital monitoring for last year, the outturn position looks like it's going to be underspent somewhat, because some of the late delays, we've had some projects that have some deliveries that were delayed from March into April. One of the projects that did go ahead and has been completed is the personal protective equipment, the new PPE equipment that's now being delivered out to stations. As a result of that, the old PPE is now being drawn back and withdrawn from service. Normally when we would pull back stock, we would put it back into the stock account to spread the cost of using that stock over the life of the asset. So if it was recharged out and if it was sent out again, the charge would be spread not just to the first user, it would be over the life of the asset. So even though it hasn't got any second-hand value, there is a value in the stock account to reflect that. And we wanted to withdraw that because we're not using that PPE anymore. We were going to withdraw it, and that requires 95,000 to be written out of the stock account, which does require approval from Finance and Resources Committee. So that's one of the recommendations. I will say that the old PPE is still being kept in stores and at the moment, and is available should it be required. And then if we're not able to get the current PPE cleaned in sufficient time, so we do have that as a sort of backup plan at the moment. Moving on, the budget for next year. We know already that the fair funding review and the business rate retention scheme have already been delayed. The spending reviews has already been announced that it will be delayed till the autumn. I think it is a very difficult situation for central government to be setting 3-year plans going forward. So I think we just need to watch this space, but I think it's going to be a very different story when we come to set the budget come Christmas time and the medium-term financial strategy. So we'll just watch what happens on a national stage. But I think it's going to be a very different picture to that when we set it for this financial year. Finally, looking at the audit, we've had the external auditors in to complete the interim audit. So they come in and look at our systems to ensure that they're working properly, so they can place reliance on them when they do the audit of the statement of accounts. That's now been completed remotely and has actually worked very well. We've had no problems with that. We've managed to let them have all the information that they require, and we've held meetings remotely, so all that's gone very well. You may have heard that the deadline for the statement of accounts has now been formally delayed. So the accounts don't require approval to the end of November. That's the audited accounts, which means we need to complete our accounts and submit them to the auditors and publish them on the website by the end of August. We're trying to work ahead of that schedule as much as we possibly can because of the impact on staffing, obviously running into November. To complete the accounts would squash the amount of time that we have to spend looking at the medium-term financial strategy and budgets. So we're still working as much as we can to get the accounts completed. Probably in June is what we're looking at the moment. There will be a couple of figures that we can't verify because they won't be available, but the bulk of the work should be completed then. I'm also liaising with the auditors because their time is, you'll remember that last year the accounts weren't approved until December because there was a delay in the external audit. They're now having to review the whole timetable again. From what I understand, the NHS has been told that they can have, they've obviously been delayed with their accounts. The pressure's been taken off of them so they can concentrate on more pressing matters. So now the auditors have actually got a gap earlier than they would normally because they won't be auditing the NHS accounts. So we're working with them to get as much of the audit completed early as possible so that, for example, the big areas, the fixed assets and the pensions, we're trying to get those done early so that when they do come in, there'll be less work for them to do when we've completed the accounts. So that's it. The recommendations are to increase the operational boundary and the authorised limit for borrowing by £2 million each to relieve the pressure on the cash flow. Or that would also require changing one of the maturity profiles for short-term borrowing. Increase that. The 10.4, the transfer of the £309 million from general reserves is no longer required, so we'd like to remove that recommendation, please. And then finally, there's the stock write-off in 10.5 of 95,000. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Brilliant, thank you, Becky, for that comprehensive update. I guess as well, just to be clear, because we are being streamed live, that the PPE Becky refers to, it's a phrase that's obviously being used in the media every day at the moment, is the day-to-day PPE of our colleagues in the fire service, not the PPE that I think is being talked about day in, day out in the papers. Just to make that clear, because I just know that if somebody is picking up on this online, just to be clear that that's the PPE that Becky was referring to.
Yes, sorry. Should have been clear on that. It's the firefighters' uniforms, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Becky, and thanks for comprehensive update, and thanks for the work that you're doing, Becky, in difficult and challenging time. And I know Charlie has been supporting the system as well. Thank you, Charlie. Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just like to thank Becky for all the work she's done under the extreme circumstances we find ourselves in, and the extra cash the government's given us is it's a real welcome, and I'm sure the work that John's done at the National Council, the fire chiefs, has hopefully had something to do with that as well. On the PPE, and when we completely finished with it, when all this is over, what do we do with it? I mean, is there any chance we could send it to a third world country for reusing, something like that?
Yes, we do that. I think John might be able to add a little bit more. I know some of it goes to the museum that we have. I think I've put something in the report. Some of it is distributed to other countries, but obviously all that's on hold at the moment because of the COVID lockdown. So it's currently still sat with the service, but that is the intention longer term. Because obviously some of it, we like to replace it all in one go because for safety reasons, so that everybody's got the same standard of PPE, so they're all trained to the same level, and it sort of reduces any uncertainty. So some of that PPE might not be that old. It might have been people that have recently joined the service, for example, and it might not be that old, but we've replaced it all in one go, so we've got the same level of PPE for everybody.
Thanks, Becky. I've got John Buckley, and then I think Terry Scott wants to just say something as well. John?
Yeah, I was just going to say bring Terry in because he's been dealing with the disposal. Becky's covered majority of it. We try and get a second life out of it. We recognise there's no value, but there is value to others. So I'll just bring Terry in on audio to comment.
Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to confirm that the PPE, the fire kit PPE has a definitive life expectancy, which is 10 years. That means that after the 10 years period, which is now expired, or shortly to expire, we can't sell it as fire PPE because it potentially could fail its tests. Therefore, what we do is we gift it to charities and organisations who use it for display purposes and for training, such as cadets, etc. But we can't sell it because it can't be used in any structural fire situation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Terry, for clarifying. That's really helpful. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Becky on the financial impact of COVID-19 outbreak report? I'm not seeing any other members signal, so the recommendations are on the first page of the report. I'm not going to read them again. I think Becky's read them out a couple of times. Members happy to approve the John, did you want to come in?
No, it was just to formally strike out 10.4 in terms of the reserve. That's not required, as Becky mentioned. So it's all of the recommendations, Chair.
Yeah, fine. John Clark, did you want to say anything, John, as Chair of Finance?
Good times.
Go on, John, say again.
Yeah, I say just thank everyone for keeping us, the book straight in difficult times. It's not easy because there are figures flying about that, even the people who write up on finance are finding it difficult to balance. So thanks, Becky, and the rest of the people that are doing it.
Cheers, John. Thank you. Okay, members happy to approve the recommendations with the amendment that John's just set out? Yeah, I'm seeing nods and approval.
Okay.
Agreed. Brilliant. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, authority governance. I touched on a little bit of this earlier, but obviously this goes into far more detail. Malcolm, are you going to introduce this, or John, are you going to introduce?
It'll be me, Michael.
Brilliant. Chair. Thanks, Malcolm. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as you said at the outset, we are making changes to the way we deliver the governance, and you referred to some of the particular issues, but what this report does is to take you through the particular detail of the changes that we're actually making under the regulations issued under the Coronavirus Act. So essentially what I'm asking you to do through the report is to note the changes, and they're all detailed in the report, and if any members have any particular questions, I will answer those around those details. But more importantly for me, it's about the operational way we deliver governance and are able to ensure to the electorate that governance is being dealt with in a transparent manner. Clearly, from my perspective, I need to ensure that the governance is delivered in that way. And what I would say is that I am delighted in which the way that the IT service have been able to deliver this online streaming, and touch wood, it seems to be working very well. But what I am asking for is authority to take such steps as I may deem necessary as the clerk to make sure that that can continue. You've already mentioned to the cancellation of the AGM on the 12th of June. And this is asking you formally to cancellation of the AGM. It is permitted in the legislation, but yet again, for the sake of transparency, I want it to be seen that the authority is approving that. And I'm also asking you to formally cancel all meetings other than policy and strategy. And I will then bring a further update report to policy and strategy on the 10th of July. Because at that point, it may well be that the temporary arrangements we have put in place, we can look at bringing back further arrangements, but obviously it depends what happens with the virus. So in essence, what the report is actually doing is asking members to formally approve the arrangements that we have meeting and going forward to the 10th of July.
Brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm. That's really, really helpful. Just one other thing to flag, Malcolm, that I don't know whether it applies to us, and only sort of passed through my mind yesterday evening, that clearly local authorities have to deal with the issue around members who do not attend a meeting formally within 6 months, and the potential therefore for members to be disqualified from the authority if they don't attend a meeting within 6 months. I know that a number of councils have sought legal opinion on this, and have realised that they need to make a proactive report to temporarily suspend those arrangements, which they are able to do, but they actually need to take a proactive report to do that. Now, I don't know whether those arrangements apply to us, because obviously we're not a council, people are appointed here, and it's probably not one for this report, Malcolm, but it might just be one for you to check out for us when we meet again in July, because just conscious there'll be some members who won't take part in a formal meeting. So, as I say, not one for now, but if you could just check that out, Malcolm, about whether that does affect us, and if it does, whether we need to just proactively take a report in a similar vein to this to suspend those arrangements. I know some councils have done that in the last week, and certainly I'll be raising it myself and John with our own authority, and I'm sure others will want to raise it with their own authorities as well.
I can certainly do that, because as you rightly say, the members that sit on the authority are appointed by the constituent bodies, the City Council and the County Council. And the other confirmation I will be seeking from the City and County Council is that the membership appointments are to continue. So I'll be seeking that formal confirmation. But I will certainly deal with that point.
Brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm. Any
So
other... Sorry, Malcolm, that's comprehensive. And just thank you as well, Malcolm, because Malcolm, was part of the integral part of the conversations in group leaders, and as well as IT being integral to this, Malcolm's talked us through, I think, a practical and transparent way that means that we can conduct business that is still accountable to the electorate and to the wider authority, but that delivers on the business that is needed in terms of John and his colleagues being able to do what they need to do in the service. So thank you, Malcolm, to you for your work on what I think is a really clear paper and a clear set of arrangements and a clear way forward. Anybody else got any? Malcolm set out the recommendations. They're there on the front page of the report. Anybody got any comments or questions they want to make on those specific recommendations, or anything else they want to add? No? Are members happy to approve those recommendations in full?
Agreed.
Brilliant. Thank you, members. Thank you, Malcolm. So the next one is the service response to COVID-19 outbreak. John, is this you, John?
Yes, it is.
John, do we deal with the question from the colleagues from the trade union here first, or do you want to speak to the report and then we deal with that after?
I think you deal with the question. I think Malcolm is prepared to read on their behalf and you to respond, Chair.
Okay, brilliant.
Yes, I'm ready to read the question, Chair, from the FBU. The FBU would like to thank all members and all departments for their part in providing a swift response to COVID-19. We understand the difficulty that working remotely can bring. However, as a service, we have adapted to the circumstances and overcome the obstacles and challenges that we have all faced. With this in mind, the FBU requests that all additional work is in line with the current Tripartite Agreement, and the extra work will cease when the Tripartite Agreement ends.
Brilliant. Thank you for reading that out, Malcolm, and thank you to our colleagues from the Fire Brigade Union for their questions. So I'll just read out the formal response to that question. Thank you for recognising the positive work being done by all within the service. Let me also say thank you to not just the FBU, but all representative bodies for their engagement as well, to echo what I said at the start of the meeting. These are unprecedented times where our communities look to us, the fire service, for leadership, support and compassion in the way that we see you as an authority doing day in, day out. I certainly, as chair, am immensely proud of how we have risen to that challenge, which is echoed by all members of this authority and by many from within our communities that we represent. You will be aware that staff from all areas of the service are undertaking this invaluable work on a voluntary basis, and that the Tripartite Agreement is only applicable to Fire Brigade Union members. Service will want to remain engaged in this work whilst ever the community needs us, and certainly I think at the moment the community does need us, and where we can provide vital support to ease the hardship and suffering being felt by many citizens. I hope the Fire Brigade Union, the FBU, will fully support us in those endeavours, providing assistance to people when they need us the most, just as indeed you have been doing over the last few weeks. So I hope that answers the question, and I'll now bring in Chief Fire Officer to speak to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of recommendations. One is really just seeking your endorsement, which I know I've received informally from members, but really just recognising that we have operated with the absence of formal governance because of the issues around being told meetings. Although I am grateful for the informal interaction that I've had with members, and I've kept all members abreast of the work we've been doing, and many individual comments back to me thanking me in the service. So, Chair, through you, for all the authority, thank you very much for your support. And the other recommendation is a slight change to our policy around employment, around re-engagement, and I'll cover that in more detail, and why that may be an option I may need to explore later in the year. So just taking you through the report, a flu pandemic is something what's been on the LRF agenda for many years, and it is something that all Category 1 responders, including ourselves, have a plan in place for. So as the pandemic started to emerge in China earlier in the year, that triggered a reaction across all Category 1s to review their plans, of which we did ours as well. So that early review took place to really dust it off and start gearing up. That enabled us to very quickly, when restrictions came in place, to move to where possible to home working. And I'll echo the plaudits already for ICT, but I would also echo that we have put significant investment in ICT over the last few years, and I think it's been that visible investment in the invisible infrastructure which enabled us to very quickly move to remote working almost seamlessly for the majority of staff. And by pure chance, we were on the cusp of rolling out a further phase of remote working, and just by accelerating that program, we've enabled a lot of people to be able to now work from home and also remain completely connected. So that has paid dividends massively. The fire and rescue services, you expect operational staff are considered as key workers, but also other staff under my direction are also considered as key workers as well. Now, that was important in the early stages around them being able to access childcare as the schools closed. But of course, that remains now even more poignant around as the testing was opened up to key workers as well. So just so you've got assurance there. We have got a number of staff who either are shielding themselves because they're in the highly vulnerable, or are living with individuals who are shielding as well. And I'm pleased to say, on a case-by-case basis, we're enabling support for them to mitigate risk, but still keeping them engaged in work. The initial phase of this, back in March, we saw an abstraction rate of around about 9% with our staff isolating. I'm really pleased to say that's now hovering around about the 3% level, which is actually, well, very, very low, but it is pretty consistent across the fire sector. So that's quite good. We know in other areas abstraction levels are higher, but the fire sector is 3%. So part of that, I think, is because our staff tend to be quite disciplined and obedient, and will be following the guidance, and we've certainly been able to implement that as much as possible in the workplace. They also understand around contamination and PPE issues and things like that. So I'm really, really pleased with that. So some of the impacts other organisations might be feeling in terms of loss of staff, we are not feeling. That moves me into service delivery. And right from the outset, we have maintained our operational response. That has not changed at all in terms of how we deliver that critical function. And if anything, as I mentioned earlier, the abstraction rates have been low, and we have to recognise a number of our on-call staff have either been furloughed or they're self-employed and no longer able to work. And even those who are facing the same restrictions, so they are spending time at home, which is obviously the place they provide their cover for us. So we've seen excellent operational availability of all our on-call assets. We're almost at 100% at 24 hours a day over the last few weeks. And also, we're not seeing any spike in any incidents that would cause any concerns either. I think there has been a number of increased garden and rubbish fires, and I think that might be linked to some of the fly tipping, which I'm sure in your authority roles you may be experiencing. But again, only at a low level and certainly not compromising our operational capability. And I think it's important. I just thank my on-call staff for the work they're doing in providing that resilience for us. The NJC you touched on earlier, there's been and the Tripartite Agreement reference, Fire Brigades Union, National Fire Chiefs Council and the employers put in place an agreement quite early on around the broader work for firefighters. And it covered the three main areas around ambulance service, support for coroners and support for the vulnerable. And that tripartite, although very, very positive, in terms of a clear intention to collectively work together, it's also really put in place a kind of black and white list as well. So other work that we wanted to engage with as well, not on the list as it were. And we credit to Craig really, because Craig Parkin on behalf of the East Midlands Fire Services in conjunction with EMAS has led on the delivery of a lot of local regional risk assessments, regional agreements, and connected into the national work around getting some of those agreements put through the tri-party process, and they have been quite successful. So credit to Craig in supporting us, and we have worked collectively as a region to deliver that. I have to recognise though that there was a delay in the early phases, and that led me really to put out a personal plea to staff to say, you know, really our communities are needing us and we need to step up here. There's some work to be done. And I was really overwhelmed with the support received for that. And over 100 individuals over a weekend stepped forward to volunteer, made themselves available to us to be deployed to do other work. And there was a massive wave of work undertaken by crews on the ground. And some of you will have seen that. Michael mentioned things like food banks, delivery of food, supporting other organisations with delivery. And really, I think, more importantly, demonstrate that we're there for them and our presence for them, not just as an emergency service, but as part of their communities. So again, credit to my staff who have stepped into that space and continue to do so. And I have made all the resources available in the service for them to do that. So you'll be aware we've got vehicles sat doing nothing. You know, I've absolutely given them the green light to use those resources to make the best impact possible on the ground. So I'm really pleased about that. We suspended all of our sort of physical prevention and protection work. So this is sort of visits into homes and into premises almost immediately, and then took a stock check of how can we restart that. And we've always maintained critical high risk visits. That has not stopped, and we're now working through being able to restart that work and start to take more of a role in terms of getting our prevention and protection work back online. We have been doing a lot of phone call and virtual inspections. We've continued to be part of the statutory consultation around plans and things. We've still monitored our high risk premises and where we've got premises under requires improvement, and also the high risk high-rise premises within the city. All work has continued in those areas. PPE, I think where staff have engaged in visits, then appropriate PPE and processes have been followed as well. And I think just a more general point around PPE, and this is in line with the PPE issue in the press, is that through our own stocks and our own low use of additional PPE, that is not a concern for us. And again, credit to Ian Pritchard, who in terms of heading up the whole procurement angle, and particularly one of his officers, who's head of procurement, is working very closely in the national efforts around procurement for fire and fully engaged in that process. And so I'm pleased to say that PPE for the fire service is not a problem for us at the moment. Bearing in mind, though, that the majority of my staff are issued personal protective equipment to themselves, which is reusable, washable, etc., including respirators and things. So we do have a high level of resilience in that area. I've mentioned that we maintained our work with the ACM clad building. We've just got one of those left in the city, and we've continued with that. And because of our protection officers having to reduce their work capacity, we have actually been able to put additional capacity into the joint inspection team in the city with an additional fire inspection officer. So where we can, we're flexing our resources to accelerate work in other areas, knowing that when we return to full capability and capacity, we'll have some catching up to do in other areas. So wherever we can, we're trying to push work along. Just moving on now to preparedness in the report. All training was stopped initially. We're now putting that back online with appropriate risk assessments in place and different procedures. So we stopped all of our on-call drill nights. We are restarting those now. We've moved some training onto online training where that's possible, and we are starting to build back up our training capability to where it needs to be, and that will progress as restrictions ease as well. A large area of work we've been engaged in partner assistance, and this has formerly been with East Midlands Ambulance Service. We have 12 of our staff. There's 12 staff from each service in the region are supporting ambulance in transport of acutely ill patients is the main work. We've trained those staff, they're ready to go. They have been filling shifts on an ad hoc basis. I'm pleased to say that the ambulance service in the region has not seen the anticipated sort of worst case scenario, and in main that is due to the restrictions and them actually being effective. So we're not seeing what other areas of country are seeing, but that support and capacity is there. And again, there is the potential as restrictions are released that we could have further waves in the future. So again, that capacity will be there. We're supporting the LRF as well through the excess desk mortuary, which has been established in the county. And again, we've got 16 staff trained for that in support, and that will be regarding transfer of bodies from other mortuaries and also the management of the mortuary as well. Again, training is taking place for that. We're ready to go should that be needed. Again, really pleasing to note that that is not required at this moment. But Ian Pritchard, who leads for us within the LRF at the SCG, that is a day-to-day briefing, and we are ready to go immediately should that be required. Another area of work is face fit testing for PPE, and that's something we're exploring up in the north of the county in Bassetlaw, should that be required as well. So just really expanding a little bit now about the local and national interaction we've had. I've mentioned the LRF. Obviously, we're a Category 1 responder, and that's meeting at a tactical and strategic level every week, with other meetings taking place outside. So the excess desk cell as an example, and Ian's actively involved in that. And Vicky Brown in our comms is involved in the communication cell to ensure that we are being consistent in our messaging from all of our media outlets, just to try and ensure that the public are as well informed and consistently informed as possible. The Chief Executive of the County Council, you'll know, members anyway, that the Chief Executive, there is a very strong sort of partnership ethos across all local government in the county. The Chief Executive of the county holds regular meetings anyway, but in this few weeks we've been holding those as weekly meetings and informal meetings outside of that again, and that's making sure all of you chief executives are being consistent and sharing concerns, and also seeking support as well as chief executives from each other. So that takes place weekly. I host a regional chief fire officers meeting, which is also the chief executive of EMAS is invited to. And again, you'll be aware that across the region as chief fire officers, we maintain very close collaboration, and that enabled Craig to very quickly step into that space and create those regional risk assessments and regional agreements. And so we speak weekly as well. And in my National Fire Chiefs Council role, there is a weekly gold meeting, and I'm part of that group as part of being leader of a committee We speak weekly as well. That on occasion includes ministers and civil servants from the Home Office, and there is a very strong connection back into the Home Office from the Gold Lead, who's the Chief of Merseyside. And then to wrap that up, there is an All Chiefs meeting which takes place virtually every Friday afternoon, where all chief fire officers are in on a conference call, and again the minister as are the opportunity to speak there as well. You know, we are really well connected both locally, regionally and nationally. That is proving dividends in our consistency. We get an early sight of information, enable us to react in advance and proportionately as this ever changing situation develops. Communication, I think it's important to talk about that. We're issuing briefing papers out to staff twice a week. We're doing a weekly Skype briefing, either hosted by myself or Craig, to staff. A further one of those will be taking place after this meeting today. We're reaching around about 170, 200 members of staff with that, which is really showing our technology can really support us in that. And you know, every cloud and silver lining, I think we'd have to accept that our immersion into the use of technology is going to live on as we deal with this pandemic and move through it. The use of this technology and our ability to connect more regularly and through technology is something I think we will continue moving forward and use, because I think it has been a real eye opener, particularly those of us who are a bit longer in the tooth, just how effective these are. Through the communication, we're also trying to maintain through social distancing within the workplace. We're trying to remain socially connected with staff, recognising some staff you know, are not turning into work. They may live at home, or they're shielding and not getting out a great deal. So we are going to great lengths to try and make sure all staff remain connected, and we're doing things like online Pilates and mindfulness sessions. Occupational health team are there, and our internal peer support team have offered support and assistance as well to staff, because we recognise the mental strain that isolation can bring. So right from the start, we try to combat that as much as possible. And I think also on communication as well, I mentioned earlier, I provided briefings to members, the group leaders meetings, which are going to be held quite frequently now as well. And I think it's important that all members of the authority know that if they need any information, that they can ask that of me, and of course they do, and I want to continue to provide that. Likewise, as always, if there's any local issues affecting members in particular individual areas, then I like to get information out to them as well, and that's continuing as well. External comms, as I said, is linked locally, nationally, and Vicky's well connected into that, and we're playing our part, not just in terms of fire, but as local leaders in communities around that. Initially, we were offering public reassurance that we were there for them. We're now, of course, moving a lot of our messaging around safety that way as well. And even later, just last night, we've started taking a prominent role around the key workers stuff, and I certainly know, Michael, you've seen that video. Really pleased a couple of our staff are in that key workers video, because although the majority of the community are right there and with us, you know, right on our shoulders supporting us, sadly there are members of the community who are not, and you know, the abuse of some key workers felt is dreadful, and we want to play our role in just really pushing that message that we are there for people. Just moving on to excuse me, recovering and returning to business as usual. That is now a real focus for me strategically. We're in a good tempo now in terms of how we're operating under the lockdown. For me, it's about working on what is this going to look like as we move forward. And as I've mentioned that we're coping really well with staff at the moment, staff are still continuing to retire, and we would have been commencing a recruitment process for firefighters. Now, we will still move forward with that, but it's likely to be more of a protracted process, and it's likely not to bear fruits of staff until later into next year than what we may have wanted. So although there have been a number of staff who have actually put the resignation and then sought to withdraw it, and I'm really pleased about that. And that has been really helpful, and that's just demonstrating how people are stepping up in support of us. The reality of it is people will still leave the organisation, and we're likely to start feeling that pain more towards the end of the year, which hopefully will be out of the pandemic, but some of the impacts will roll forward. So we'll be looking at supporting particularly our whole-time establishment with bringing in transferees, potential of migration of on-call staff into whole-time roles, and increasing some on-call hours to support us. But one of the areas I would like to explore is also offering the ability to re-engage retired firefighters to come back and work for us for a short period of time to help maintain that operational capability. Now, currently within our pay policy, we don't go through re-engagement because in normal play we'd have no requirement to do so. But I do see that might be an opportunity we could use, and some services are already looking at that who were due to start recruit training right now. They have sought to do that. We're not under that much pressure, but it would just be one of those avenues as a blended approach that I would want to explore, particularly later in the year. And it would be small numbers, not significant numbers at all, but small numbers if we were to use that. And then the other element of that is really starting to gear up about how we can get back to business as usual, and what usual might look like for a long period of time. So if social distancing is required for long periods of time, then what does our normal business as usual look like, both internally around training, recruitment, maintaining the establishment, etc., but also in the delivery of all of our services to communities. And the final point I would make is that we were due to be going through an LGA equalities peer assessment and HMI inspection throughout the year. Both of those have now been postponed and will be reviewed as and when restrictions are released. So I'll pause there, Chair. I'm conscious I've given a real lot of information there across every facet of the organisation, and I'm sure there may be kind of questions or comments from members which either myself or other members of the team will deal with.
Brilliant, thank you, John, and thanks for taking us through that in considerable detail. And as you know, just repeat what we said earlier, some great work going on. Thank you for your leadership and for the rest of the team in relation to that. Any comments or questions people want to ask John on the recommendations on the report? Andy? Just need to unmute you, Andy. You're muted, Andy.
Can you hear me now?
Got you, Andy.
Thanks, Michael. Only to repeat what I've said previously a while back, just to thank John and his team for all the work they're doing. It's from a community point of view, it's really well appreciated. And I think once this is all over, we have to come up with some idea to show our appreciation, especially to the retained officers in some form.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. And yeah, noted, sensible contribution. I know you made that point at group leaders as well. Toby?
Yeah, again, I just want to echo thanks and stuff. I mean, I found out yesterday that we got fire officers delivering controlled medicines because of some issues in the area. So really appreciate it. I just need to get it on record really, because certainly working with our lead areas for it within the city, I know that the fire service response has been very positive whenever questions have been asked or requests for help have been made.
John, Clark, did you want to come in?
I need to say thanks really. I've listened in detail. It's obviously there's a lot of work going off, but I know from a Gedling point of view, it's the fact that lots of fire officers are helping us keep our humanitarian centre, hub or whatever we like to call it, down in Carlton working, and it's a great asset to the team that are working there. And thank you. Pass that on to the unions as well.
Thanks, John. Jonathan, Sybil, anything you wanted to add?
No, it's already been said, just obviously thanking the team, but yeah, thank you.
Sybil?
Again, to just echo thanks to everybody across the board, that everybody is doing their absolute utmost, and same, and many thanks to everybody.
Thanks, Sybil. Okay, the two recommendations are to endorse the approach taken by the Chief Fire Officer in responding to the COVID-19 outbreak, and to approve the short-term re-engagement of operational staff to be utilised as part of a blended approach to maintaining critical staffing levels. And I just echo what John said, clearly at sensible times sometimes mean that you have to make sure that you don't rule out sensible options off the table. And I think what John's doing here is making sure that we've got sensible options open to us should they be needed and required as part of a blended approach. And that would make eminent sense, I think, in what clearly unprecedented and challenging times for us, John. Malcolm, it would be great, I think, if we could just add a third recommendation, maybe in between the two recommendations or after the two, just for authority to formally thank the Chief Fire Officer and everybody in the service for their response to the COVID-19 outbreak and their support to communities across the city and county. I know we've all said it, but I think it would be really nice on behalf of authority to formally, just get that down as a recommendation and it be minuted, and then John be able to share that with everybody in the service.
Yes, we can do that, Chair, and I'm sure Kath will have captured that as part of the minute. If we just need to approve it.
Okay. People happy with that as an additional recommendation?
Great.
Okay,
Yeah.
happy to approve all the recommendations, those three with the addition, and I'm sure Catherine can put that into a sensible form of words with Malcolm and John. If you can then circulate that to all personnel in the service, would be appreciated.
Agreed.
Michael.
Chair, I have a form of words if you want them.
Yeah, please, Malcolm.
To thank the Chief Fire Officer and all members of the fire service for their efforts during the COVID-19 outbreak. Is that
Brilliant.
sufficient?
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm. Okay, so those they're agreed by members. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the establishment of a fire engineer post. I think we've got a question from our colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union. Malcolm, do you want to read that out?
Yes, I'll read that out, Chair. The FBU requests that the authority makes the fire engineer post an equivalent grey book role in line with the current ranks and relevant qualifications. If a grey book employee is successful at applying for the post, then the FBU request that this would be offered as a grey book role.
Thanks for reading that out, Malcolm, and thank you to our colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union for submitting the question. So I'll read out the formal response. Just for clarity, the role was previously undertaken by a group manager who by coincidence held qualification, and as that individual retired, the group manager post has been filled to maintain the role within the establishment. The proposal being considered today is to increase the numbers in the establishment in direct response to the need to develop and expand the professional knowledge, expertise and capacity of the service. The Chief Fire Officer does not believe that any further operational expertise is required in the Fire Protection Department, and he also recognises that grey book roles are compromised by the need to maintain operational competence, generally have higher turnover in such posts and have higher costs associated with them. Furthermore, the post will also provide greater career progression for current fire protection professionals and demonstrates the authority's desire to offer opportunities to all. The post will be open to anyone with skills, knowledge and expertise. The most suitable candidate will be offered the role regardless of their current conditions of service on the basis of it being a green book role going forward. So I hope that answers the question that our colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union have submitted. And obviously we're live, and I'm sure that will be captured and recorded as part of the minutes. John, do you want to introduce the report?
Yes, if I may, Chair, I'm just going to move straight on to Craig Parkin. It's within his directorate, Chair, so I'll pass to Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Craig. Can't hear you, Craig. I think you.
Hello.
Can hear you now, Craig. Got you.
Okay. Technology working well. Yeah, I suppose in terms of members, the actual report is quite a short report, but what I'd like to sort of say, bring members back to, it's one building block in a direction of travel and an improvement for the organisation. So we'll remember ourselves, in the report touches on the Grenfell tragedy and the Hackett inquiry and the recommendations that came out of that. And through the National Fire Chiefs Council, we're working through those recommendations. One of those things that came out of there was the National Fire Chiefs Council's regulators competency framework for fire safety. And this is one of those roles within there that gives the organisation access to a greater level of competencies that we can tap into. Having said that, of course, we are already signed up to a regional memorandum of understanding where we have access to a fire engineer, but this gives us a little bit more access and a little bit more flexibility. So this is really about trying to manage some of that risk and give a higher level of competence where our fire protection officers, for example, can go and get advice very directly. You'll also remember that HMI gave us a good in the way we enforce fire protection. And this report really is a bit of a catalyst to sort of provide members a bit more reassurance that we're not being complacent and we're looking for continuous improvement within fire protection anyway. So this is part of our improvement programme. Along with, we've also now really completed the training, bar a few stragglers, around business safety check training for all operational staff. So they'll be able to deal with the lower risk fire protection inspections and be able to free up time and capacity from our fire protection teams to focus on higher risk. And again, that should see increased productivity, which is likely to uncover issues that might require a fire engineer more often. So we're trying to forward plan and foresee some of these issues with the introduction of the fire engineer. And clearly we're going to need time in terms of recruitment and selection. And as John touched on, and you touched on, Chair, in your reply to the question, we're looking for the right skills that are going to retain some corporate knowledge and also give some aspiration through the competency framework for progression to retain that knowledge and understanding, not just of the legislation, but also the risk within the city and county. There's no denying that we're getting a more complex built environment. And John also touched on the multi-occupational residential building work in the city that we're doing with our city council partners, and we've put more capacity into there in the last fortnight. And again, I think what we are going to see, particularly through COVID, we may well see repurposing of buildings as we recover. And we may require more, not just under a statutory consultee, but we might actually require more expertise in terms of fire engineering around repurposing of buildings. So again, it gives us a little bit more strength to our arm in doing that work. And we need to understand as well, this is about making the city and the county safer for people that use these types of buildings. And there's a clear focus on us now through HMI about what is it we're doing in terms of both identifying risks, but also responding to it. So that's probably where I'd stop, Chair, really, because I could go on, because it's what I would sort of say, it's only increasing the establishment. It's demonstrating clear commitment, I think, by the authority and the service about where it wants to put its resources and about where we need to manage risk best. So hopefully this role can be recruited to quite quickly, pending the obviously recommendation being agreed by authority. We can actually get out to advert and start that process. Because we don't want to wait, and we can do many elements of the recruitment process prior to appointment being made, depending on the restrictions of COVID-19 situation. So that's probably where I'd stop, really, Chair. So it underlines the ambition of the authority to make improvements.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. And for me, this is a very positive report, and thanks for your work, Craig, and others' work in bringing this forward. As you said, there's a couple of points for me. Crucially, this is an increase in the establishment. It's about additional capacity and support in the area, and it's a clear demonstration from the service authority that they take this area of work seriously, and that we really want to boost our support and capacity in this area. So all credit to you, Craig, and others who have brought this report forward. I think it's a clear demonstration by the fire service and the authority that we mean business in this area, and hopefully, as you said, in spite of the challenging circumstances, we can get the post appointed to fairly soon and as swift as practically possible. Any other comments or questions people want to make on the recommendation? I mean, the recommendation speaks for itself. It's there at the front of the report that members approve an increase in for the permanent establishment with the creation and recruitment of a fire engineer role. Any comments or questions on that recommendation or the report? People happy to approve the recommendation?
Agreed.
Yeah, getting nods. Yeah, thumbs up. Agreed. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, that's agreed by members. Thank you very much. The next section, I think, is now we go into exclusion of the press and public. I think. Just bear with me. Go back to the. Yeah, that's right. Exclusion of the. So item 8 is exclusion of the public.
Yeah. So just bear with me, Chair, members, while I stop the live stream.
Just 1 second, Gavin. Let me just read out the formal. Let me just read out the formal wording before you do that.
Yeah, give me the nod.
So item 8 is exclusion of the public. So I'll just read out for transparency purposes the wording of the relevant legislation. To consider excluding the public from the meeting during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So just for those people who are following this online, this is a provision that's allowed in terms of the Local Government Act 1972 and the relevant section 100A(4) that allows authorities and local councils to deal with reports under exemption, because as the wording says there, having regard to all circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I hope that's clear for people who may be following, either press or members of the public who may be following. Members in agreement with that going into closed session in accordance with the legislation? Okay.
Okay, if you just bear with me.